All right, so this video is about the experiment as a way of doing research in psychology. So I'd like to talk about the different things I'd like you to know in that, and also to point your attention to in the chapter. Also, we'll be talking about ethics. The experiment, the basic goal is to come up with that cause and effect relationship that we discussed in the last video. You could not demonstrate using correlational studies. In the basic experiment, I have pictures here of a very simple basic type of study that I myself was involved with as a middle school student, junior high. And basically, I'm using this as an example because I think it will help you to get the two terms I have on this slide, independent variable and dependent variable. In the most basic study in a biology class, we were given plants that were of the same seed stock, and we planted them in the dirt, watered them regularly, but half those plants we were asked to put in the windows of the classroom, and the other half we put in a closet that received very little light. We watered them, we treated them pretty much exactly the same, except there was one difference: how much light they received. At the end of 3 weeks, our goal was to measure how tall they got. Simple experiment. Basically, the idea is that we have one thing, as these little student researchers we were doing, that we were interested in trying to figure out: will light affect growth rates of these plants? Of course it did. I mean, plants need light. So what we found was that the ones who were in the window, they grew, well, I don't know, I can't remember how tall it was, but 8 inches or so. The other ones in the closet, not much at all. So this is, I'm using this to illustrate these two terms I have on the screen here: independent variable. That's what we as experimenters manipulate. So if I'm an experimenter in a psychology experiment, I can manipulate things like if I'm coming up with a drug for depression. I can say, okay, this one group is getting 10 milligrams of my new drug. This other group is getting 20 milligrams. This other group is getting 30 milligrams. I'm manipulating the dosage. If I want to see what sort of impact that has on depression, that's my dependent variable. We just sit back and wait and watch. Does this have an effect? And my original study in biology with the plants, we just sat back and watched. Did it affect the growth rate of the plants? And of course it did. So the dependent variable in that study was how much did the plants grow. The independent variable was whether I, as a researcher, provided the plants sunlight or not, or the amount of sunlight that was provided. Okay, I'm going to elaborate a little bit further. Another example of this that was a real study that was done was to have moms who just had newborn babies being given informed consent, which is something I'm going to describe in just a minute, saying like, okay, we want some of the moms to breastfeed their babies and some moms to give formula to. And so they were randomly assigned to those groups if they agreed to participate in the study. And then for a period of months, those moms only either provided breast milk or formula. Now, one of the things that these researchers had to do is, now when you're breastfeeding a baby, obviously you have to hold the baby and cuddle it close to your chest like that. They had to tell the moms who were giving formula that while they were feeding their babies, they had to hold them close to their chest so that the touch would be the same amount in both of those groups. That's important because in order to have an experiment with results you can trust, you have to make sure every factor is the same in every group except the independent variable that you're trying to mess with. And this independent variable that the researchers were trying to mess with was, does breast milk versus formula have an impact later on intelligence scores for these kids? And that's what they did. They measured these kids' intelligence scores at the age of 8 after they'd either been given breast milk as they were growing up or they'd been given formula. What they found was it actually did. Breast milk seems to do something to the developing infant's brain. And we know that was the only factor that was different between these two groups. And the kids that were given breast milk performed better. So our conclusion then, we can say, again, the experiment is to come up with causation. We can say that breast milk causes better intelligence later on in life. So that's the point of an experiment. Keep everything the same in all groups except one thing that you're messing with. And then if you have differences in groups in your dependent variable later on, you can justifiably say that that difference in the dependent variable was due to your manipulation of the independent variable. Right? Sometimes I was just describing the study that I could do as a psychological researcher with drug treatments for depression. Sometimes people who are like in a drug study, let's say that I run a study on depression and I put an ad on Craigslist or whatever, try to get people to participate. If I get people responding to me and I'll say, hey, I'll give you $200 to participate in my study. If I say, okay, all the people who contact me first are going to be in group 1 who are given 10 milligrams, I could really mess up my study because I could have the most desperate who need the money or the most depressed people all signing up early on. And if I load up my one treatment group with just those people, I'm biasing my results from the get-go. So I have to randomly assign people as they contact me to the different treatment groups. Some who get 10 milligrams of an antidepressant drug, some who get 20 milligrams of the antidepressant drug, and those who get 30 milligrams. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give some of these people a sugar pill. And that's what's called a placebo. And a person who's getting a placebo will think, oh, I'm getting this. Because we want to make sure, and everyone's told from the get-go, you may be in the placebo group. But we want to make sure that if this drug is effective, it's better than just one's expectations. Because I'm taking a pill every day, I just may think, I'm getting better because I'm taking a pill. It's like, well, that may just be your expectations, and that's affecting your behavior and your self-assessment. So if the drug's really effective, the 10, 20, 30 milligram people are going to be a lot better in terms of depression scores than the group who just got a sugar pill. Also, I have up here, what is a double-blind study? One of the things that sometimes researchers do, I was in a study for allergies when I was in graduate school. And they said, okay, if you have allergies, we'll pay you to be in this study. They did. I need the money. And they said, but we don't know if you're going to get the placebo or the real drug that we're experimenting on. I had hay fever, really bad runny nose and red, watery eyes. So once a week, I would go in and get a shot. Now, I didn't know if the shot contained saline solution, or the placebo, or if it contained the new drug they were experimenting with. But neither did the nurse who shot me every week. And they didn't want that, so I was blind to it, and the nurse was blind to it. So that means two groups were blind, because they didn't want the nurse's expectations to influence my assessment of how I was doing with my allergies. Because if he or she said to me, aren't you feeling better? Because we're giving you real stuff. That's going to mess up the results. I'm like, oh, I'm really getting the real stuff. So I'm sure I'm feeling better. I'm not having near the symptoms I used to have. So you want to keep everyone ignorant of it, except the person who's kind of managed, the researcher who's doing the overall study. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, there's an example of a terrible, unethical, horrible study that was done. Some of you may have heard of this, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. In 1932, there were some medical researchers from the Public Health Association wanted to see, basically, they had some idea, some racist idea that Black people and white people would not respond in the same way to syphilis. And so they were going in to see how people in this Black community in Alabama, how their bodies responded to syphilis. They found about half the people tested positive for syphilis when they first went in, half did not. They were promised medical care. Even 15 years after this started, in 1947, when penicillin was found to be effective as a treatment for penicillin, those folks nobody was told they actually had syphilis or given penicillin. They just kept watching them die, develop dementia, and do other things until someone found out this was going on and blew the whistle and exposed this. And obviously, once it was discovered and reported in the newspapers, it was stopped. And this basically changed the way research is done in the United States, because once it was recognized that this racism was so systemic and killing people, not only the men who were part of the study, but their wives and some of their kids. It's like, okay, if you're going to do research, it cannot look anything like that, because it's criminal. And so basically what happened after this study was exposed, the US government set up an office called the Office of Human Research Protections, which came up with these sorts of ethical standards. Part of it is that they developed what's called an institutional review board, and that is that any hospital, university, any school, any organization that is doing research has to set up a board of of other researchers. But like at Lincoln, we have an IRB, institutional. It includes faculty, includes students, it includes community members. And if I want to do a study, I have to like propose it and write up exactly what I want to do and have to give it to this board, and they have to review it and figure out, okay, is this going to put anyone at risk or at harm or anything like that? And these are the things they look at, and you can see on this list. Things that must be guaranteed that do no harm to any participant is the #1 priority, the #1 ethical priority. And so if the board says, no, people are getting harmed, they can deny that the study is allowed to be done. Another thing that has to be done in all studies, informed consent. People who are signing up for study have to be told, here's what's going to happen to you if you do this study, so as they can make a well-informed decision. Also, there's voluntary, that a person doesn't feel coerced into doing it, and they can quit at any time without penalty. So that's what true voluntary is. That allergy study I told you I participated in was kind of questionable whether it was voluntary, because I was a graduate student and they offered me $200. I couldn't afford to say no. So whether that was voluntary is kind of a question. Also, that the information I provide is confidential. If you're a research participant, that the information you provide is going to be kept confidential and secret, so other people don't know, like your responses, especially if you're asking personal information. And then at the end of the study, you let all the people know, here's why we were doing this study. And if you have the results, you can explain those to them too. So these are the things that are required now, largely because of what happened with that Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I'm going to post online a YouTube video describing that particular study, and I'd like you to watch it. So that's the end of this presentation on the experiment and ethics in research. Thank you.